Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, Firefly Tarot, and welcome back to our series, How to Read Tarot Cards Tarot 101. If you missed the first lesson, I have linked it in the description where I talked about shuffling, drawing cards, and simple spreads. So for today's lesson, we're gonna continue with what I mentioned in the last one, which is getting into the meat of the reading, and that will be interpreting the cards. Okay, so this is part one, so it's a bit of beginner level, and as I keep going in the series, it will gradually increase in difficulty. Okay, so you can grab your tarot cards if you have any, or oracle cards, or again, even playing cards, just to follow along with today's lesson. So I talked about getting your energy on the cards, shuffling, and laying cards in whatever way you prefer. Okay, I really emphasized the fact that there are no rules. Okay, so let's say that you're going to perform a reading. And for today's lesson, we're going to just simplify it and say we're going to check into present energies. And since the easiest thing to do is to do a reading for yourself, we'll go with that one, okay? And then later on, we'll talk about reading for someone else as well. So let's use an example question, something again, very, very simple. And we want to check on our actual energies. So you can check on your energy or the energy of another person or even a situation. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to interpret cards, asking the question of what are my current energies? Okay, so don't look at that for now. What are my current energies? All right, just as an example. Now, what I want to teach you today is just one method of how to interpret what you see in front of you. So I'm obviously taking into consideration that when you first learn tarot, it's going to take some time. There are 78 cards. We're going to go into depth in different videos. But today, you don't have to have any knowledge of the actual meanings to interpret the cards, okay? And this leads us into method one, looking at the visuals. So when I say the visual, I mean anything, the image, the figures that you see in the card, the colors, even the name of the card if it's a major arcana especially. If it's a minor arcana, it might be the number if you're into numerology, and the detail. All right, so this is what we're going to be going over, just what you see in front of you. So the practice question is, what are the current energies of either yourself or whatever the case is, okay? So let's start off with some obvious positive cards. I've taken out a couple over here. So we already looked at the Sun card. Let's use the Sun card as our first example. So let's say you pull this card in whatever way you prefer to draw cards, okay? Here is the card that will act as the answer to the question that we propose, okay? So what are my current energies or their current energies? And you pull the Sun card. Now, take a moment with this card. Maybe you're holding it in front of you. If you have tarot cards, you can use it as an example. All right, what is your first impression of the Sun card? What do you notice first about this card? Again, taking into consideration the image, the figures, the colors, the name, the detail, whatever it is, just visually. For me, I noticed the obvious, which is that it's called the Sun card, and we have this giant sun here up top in the clear blue sky. I noticed that. Maybe you might actually notice the child on the white horse, or maybe you actually might even notice something in the background rather than the foreground first, which are these sunflowers and this brick wall here. Okay, so again, there are no right or wrong answers. The only answer is the one that you are uniquely drawing from the card, you as the reader. Every reader will have a different interpretation for the most part. Okay, now let's pause for a second and note that each card in the tarot does have a specific traditional meaning. But even that can change over time. I'll go into that in different videos, but the Sun card is a little obvious, right? So you see this happy child in a beautiful, clear, sunny day, and immediately we think of something positive. So the answer to whatever question you're asking, in our case, it's what are the present energies or the current energies of myself or someone else? We might say they're feeling happy. The energies are positive. The energies are warm, and maybe you might say something like loving or a sense of freedom, okay? Only based off of the visuals that we see, all right? So that's just one method of how to do this. So practice with this. The Sun card is just one example, and it's, when I say an obvious card, it's because it's visually obvious. There are plenty of other cards that are not so visually obvious, and we'll talk about those a little bit later in this video. So let's try again. Let's say that the next card that you pull for as an answer for whatever question it is, and we're just going with present energies. Let's say that you pull this one. Okay, pretty similar. You have the Sun here, and just giant Sun here in the background. You have the Angel. You have the masculine and the feminine. Okay, so, and you have obviously the title down here, the Lovers. So this might be a little difficult to interpret if it has nothing to do with a love reading, because this is a stereotypical sort of answer for a love reading. But what if you're not asking about love at all, romantic love? You might then interpret it based off of the energy of love, the beautiful paradise-looking place that they're in, or this protective-looking angel here, or the Sun itself, right? So again, going back to the question, what are my current energies, or the current energies of whatever it is? What might you say? What might be your answer, okay? Where did your eye fall first? That's your answer. So if your eye fell probably first on the Sun, you might say again, something positive. So your energies right now are very positive. Maybe you're feeling very warm and bright and energetic, all things associated with the Sun. Maybe your eye fell to the Angel. So instead of saying whatever you said here, you might first say, maybe you're feeling that you're protected by the divine. Maybe you feel quite spiritual. Okay? Well, if you felt both, that's perfectly fine too. So, excuse me, for this method, for visual interpretation, you're going with your first instinct, and then if you see something else after that, you add to it. You develop that answer, okay? So you might say the part about the Sun first, and then the Angel, and then maybe you see something in the background that you find equally relevant. Each tarot card has infinite possibilities, but again, you're going with your first instinct, you're going with your personal, unique feelings for each card. So sometimes I notice the snake, sometimes I'll notice the little, these are like fire looking leaves here. Maybe I'll notice the mountain in the background, okay? Or the obvious, figures here. So just practice, 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 and make sure to go with your gut level intuition, which I always talk about. Now, the most common thing to do is to second guess yourself. So just do your best to blurt out the first thing that you see, okay? So to do that, let's just go with another card for a moment. All right, so let's say that you get, as an answer to whatever the question is, you get the Three of Cups. What is the first thing that you see here? Blurt it out, okay? Maybe you first saw something like celebration. You see this card and you see three people toasting with whatever is in their cups. This is the Three of Cups, okay? So whatever your first instinct is, blurt it out, okay? So without any hesitation at all, just blurt it out. In fact, that's pretty much what I always do. Let's say that you're stumped and you really don't know what to say. I have actually found that as I start talking, the answer comes to me. Even if I have no clue in my mind what the answer is, I will just start talking and blurt out the first thing that stumbles on my, on my lips. And it might be any of the details that I see. Okay, so you notice there's some fruit or whatever vegetables down here. Maybe that could be for you a sign of abundance. We'll talk about symbolism next. Maybe you're noticing first the color or the sky. Okay, so you kind of get my point. That is the simplest explanation for how to interpret the cards, is just using the visual information in front of you, any of them actually. And again, blurting out your first instincts. But let's say that you want to go a little bit deeper, and we're still using the obvious cards for now. And let's say that you want to go with a little bit more of a symbolic answer. After this, I'll show you some examples of obviously negative cards because these are all the positive ones. Okay, so let's say here we're going with the Fool. So the Fool card is actually the first card in the Major Arcana, but it is 0. It's not number 1, it's 0. So for 0, numerically, it can go either way. It's not positive or negative. It can go either way. So that's why this card is probably a good example of maybe even something neutral. But if you're asking any question, what is the question? We're just going with this one, right? What are the current energies of blank? What is your first impression here? You might look at how this Fool figure is standing at the edge of a cliff. Maybe you're noticing the sun first. Maybe you're noticing the little white rose that he's carrying, or his knapsack, or the dog. Okay? So going with a little bit deeper into this method of visual, let's now talk about possible symbols, right? If you are a creative person, a writer, you took an English class, you probably already know about symbolism, and maybe you're proficient in symbolism. Even if you're not, that's totally fine. You can always learn symbolism, but you can interpret symbolism without learning about it, similar to the whole vibe of today's video. So let's take a look at the knapsack. That's a pretty obvious symbol. Imagine any time that you were carrying a heavy backpack, and what might that mean to you? It feels like a burden, right? Because literally, physically, it's a burden. But in tarot, we may be interpreting that as it might be emotionally or spiritually a burden. So this is the opposite. This is barely anything. This Fool, he's carrying almost nothing. And this tiny little knapsack is the bare minimum of what anybody could carry on a journey. So what might that symbolize to you? Just by looking at it. See, it looks very light. He does not look burdened at all. He looks quite free. He looks like he's standing tall. And he doesn't look bothered by anything. Okay, so maybe you might interpret the knapsack as a feeling of freedom and just, again, feeling unburdened by the burdens of life or the obligations of life. Or maybe instead of looking at the knapsack, maybe you saw the little white rose that he's holding. Okay, so what might that, how might you interpret the white rose? Even without knowing symbolism, you might be able to guess. Maybe white, you may have heard that white might be a symbol of purity or innocence. Okay, and the way that he's holding it is he's holding it as a symbol of maybe his innocence and purity, perhaps, right? It matches the color of the dog, the color of the sun, and therefore it matches the entire vibe of positivity coming from this card. The Fool down here, the title of the Fool, is actually a little bit misleading if you don't know tarot, because oftentimes we think of the Fool and we think of someone that is foolish. But you'll definitely learn over time that for tarot, nothing is as it seems, and that everything has its own unique interpretations based off of you. Let's use another example, but let me actually give you the opposite ends of this, right? So with positive cards, I gave you a couple of pointers that if you see, for example, certain visual markers, where is it? Here it is. If you see certain visual markers of the cards, you can probably guess that they will be a positive answer. Okay, so here you see the sun, the golden sky, same thing for these cards, or the blue sky, right? And here, this is the 10 of Cups, you see an actual rainbow. So these are obviously positive cards, and that will help to lead your answer. All right, so the color, we have gold, we have, with the exception of the 7 of Swords, which is this card. Be careful with this card, but we'll get into that in a different video, but don't trust this card because it means like something sneaky. But you can see here, there's no sun, but we do have a nice golden object here, a clear sky. You can see any green and vibrant, either, let's say, vegetation or nature is also another symbol of something positive. It matches real life. That's basically it, you know. Look at the nice, beautiful day, the 2 children. Children often represent innocence and purity and just love. Okay, blue sky there in the background. Flowers, you know, these are obvious symbols of something obviously positive. So we'll leave it at that for now. Now, the opposite end. We have the obviously negative cards, right? I'm calling them negative and positive for the purpose of today's video because that's a whole other topic. This might not necessarily be a negative card depending on what you're asking and what's going on in the reading. But let's just say for today, okay? So let's say that, we'll go back to the question, what are my current energies or the current energies of whatever it is? And you see the Devil card, all right? Now, the opposite of over here, we had gold, we had blue skies, we had brightness. Here, we have darkness. And let me show you a couple of examples. So we have the Devil, we have here the gray sky, the black here in the front. Okay, more black sky here. It's actually snowing, bad weather. Weather is a big symbol for a lot of things. So look at the obvious content. Now this one's interesting. I just didn't even realize I did this, but you have the clear blue sky. So you can certainly note the clear blue sky, but I think that the obvious detail here is the fact that this person is holding a huge burden. This is a 10 of Wands. Let me skip that just for a second. I forgot I had this in here. Okay, you have the black sky, you have the lightning bolts, you have the obvious chaos going on here. So again, just by looking at the visual markers, you'll be able to interpret a reading without knowing the tarot cards at all. Okay, this is obviously someone who's trapped in some way. And here, more black, swords, pain. You can just see it based off of this, all right? So let's go back to card 1 with the Devil. So you're interpreting it now. What are the current energies of whatever it is, you or someone else? Okay, what do you see first? Do you see maybe the name first? The figure first, which is the actual Devil? Or the two people that are chained together at the neck? Maybe you notice the black in the background, you know, whatever it is, it's up to you. Okay, blurt it out and expand on it, all right? But let's use maybe a different card for this one. Let's use the 5 of Cups, okay? So the obvious answer here, maybe you might say, okay, well, you're feeling sad. Or this person or this situation, there's a negative energy or a sad energy behind it. Now, it's not only sad. This can be interpreted in many different ways. What do you see? You might see sadness / sorrow. You might see a person that is wanting to be alone, isolating themselves. Or your eye might then go down here to these details. You can see here that these are cups that have spilled onto the ground. So maybe just link it to how you think a person might feel. If they spill their cups, they might feel regretful, okay? But there are also these 2 cups over here, which can add to your reading, okay? So again, we're going with the first instinct, anything visual at all. Then you expand on any of these details by just following wherever your eye wants to go next. So maybe you see the black first, then the cups, and then maybe you might even see the water in the background, all right? What do you think of the water? Different energy, right? Water in tarot is typically associated with maybe cleansing, or maybe even if you go deeper into it, it actually can represent the stream of intuition, okay? So again, the idea here is to go with the obvious meaning of what it already means in our regular world, and then if you want to go deeper, you look into the symbolism, the symbolic possible meanings, okay? So a good example of this is actually the 8 of Swords. So, and you will learn this if you go on any websites or books to actually sit there and read the meanings. That's actually what I did with this card. Well, I did that with all the cards, but I remember this example because it was a really good example. So, what do you see here? Obvious meaning. You see a person who is tied up and blindfolded and surrounded by a cage of swords. But you also might notice that these are not chains, and maybe you might even have a feeling that this person can free themselves if they really wanted to, okay? Maybe you don't see that, that's fine, but maybe you did have that feeling. Then your eye might go down here to this little pool of water, and you can see that this person has their foot somewhat in the water, almost, but maybe not entirely. Okay, so I mentioned in the previous card that water can represent intuition, and you will see that in different cards. I can show you at some point, but water may represent intuition, and the reason for this, it is symbolic, but intuition is fluid. and water is fluid. So in symbolism, we often associate the two. That's just a little background, I suppose. But you can see here that their foot is not quite within the water. So what does that actually mean in a reading? It might mean that they can use their intuition if they were to just look down and free themselves and really step into their inner water. Okay? The blindfold, it's an obvious literal meaning that we cannot see. So what is the then metaphorical or symbolic interpretation of that? That maybe psychically, spiritually, or emotionally we feel blind. So here she's physically trapped, literally trapped. So again, in tarot, everything is very symbolic. So what might that mean? You feel trapped emotionally, or whatever, the situation or the person, whatever the question is, feels trapped emotionally. But they can actually get themselves out if they really needed to or wanted to. This is just a simple example of this interpretation. Let's do a final one for the negative batch here. The lovely 10 of Swords. Anytime I see this card, I really do feel this pain. It's a lot, okay? So let's say you get this card. What is your first impression? Really look at the card. I'll give you a moment. Okay? Maybe you notice the obvious black sky. Well, you might have actually noticed before that the swords in the back, okay? So we have all 10 swords in the person's back. So if you're looking at it, the literal meaning is, hey, this person might be dead, but that's probably not the interpretation you would come to, honestly. You might just say this person is in a lot of pain, and maybe they actually feel stabbed in the back, right? Maybe they feel hopeless because of this black sky. And maybe you did note that over here, into the distance, that the sky actually brightens. Did you notice that? Or did you miss that, right? It doesn't matter, because in time, you will notice everything. Trust me, in time. You will start to notice things that you never noticed before. And on that note, that the things that you notice will definitely change depending on the question and the energies of the person you're looking into, but that's another video. Okay, so we looked at some examples of the obvious meanings. We looked at all of the visual clues, the titles, the details, the foreground and the background of each card. Okay, now, one card might not be enough. So let's just conclude this video with talking about clarifying a card and to clarify the answer that we're looking for. Okay, so let's say that we have a card that's a little bit more difficult to interpret, right? Probably something of the minor arcana, which I'll get into in the future. So let's say we have here the 7 of Pentacles. So here, the content we see is that someone is working on the garden. Maybe they've planted their seeds, and maybe they're just sort of hanging out and waiting for the fruits of their labor to bloom, okay? But this card does not quite have an obvious visual meaning to it. So if you're not sure, even if you either know or don't know the meaning behind the 7 of Pentacles, you can still draw a different card to clarify the meaning of this. Now, what might happen if we have this card and what you drew as a clarifier card was something negative, like the 9 of Swords, okay? Do you see how this here all of a sudden shifts into a negative meaning based off of the card that it's next to? And maybe it wasn't even just one card. Maybe you drew more than one negative card. Now we're sure that this card, this original card, probably means something negative. So how might I interpret this? So I'm looking at this card next to it, and I'm looking at the visual cues. It shows someone who is distressed. It shows someone who is potentially even waiting for something similar to this, but they're anxious about it, okay? So you can draw your conclusions based off of that. Your first impressions, blurt it out, try to talk it out, try to form a story with the cards. And if you're satisfied and you know it's right, then that's great. You have your answer. If you're still not sure, draw more cards, but try not to draw too many at first because it can get confusing. Let's do the opposite. Let's take the same card and let's say we're looking at something else, or, you know, just something else. Maybe we're taking a turn in the reading. So you have this one. Where was my other? So you have the Seven of Pentacles. Let's say that as a clarification, you got the Sun, going back to the Sun card. Very different, isn't it? So this time, maybe you don't see something negative in the Seven of Pentacles. Maybe you actually see this person is willing to be patient and wait for the fruits of their labor. And maybe you're connecting it to the sunflowers here in the background, or the actual sun itself, or this happy-go-lucky feeling here. All right? So now your interpretation is based off of the clarifier to help you, to give you a little bit of a boost in this interpretation, okay? So instead, now you might say that positive meaning. So yes, here you are, you're standing in front of your garden, you're proud of your work, you're happy with your work, and you will have the fruits of your labor. Okay, so that's just possible interpretations. I'd love to know how you guys interpret your cards. Obviously, we can't really get into that, but let me know in the comments how you did with this lesson. If you have any particular questions, remember this is just part 1. All right, so I think that for the last thing that I want to do, as you guys are still absorbing all of this, let's try maybe a question not about the present, but about the future. All right, so this is just one example of one question. What are the energies for my next 2 weeks? Let's say that you're looking into your next 2 weeks. And let's say that, let's just use this example of the Three of Cups. Okay, so here's the Three of Cups. What's your first impression? All right, what do you notice first? Okay, go over all the steps again. Do you notice any of the details, the color, the figures? If you want, again, draw a clarifier card. Maybe you draw this one as a clarifier card, similar. If it's similar, it actually makes it much easier to interpret. You see here the coloring, you see the overall detailing might be similar. Don't worry about the meanings just yet. Just go with your gut level intuition, okay? And this reading for the future is trickier only because it hasn't happened yet, so you would have to wait and see. So I invite you to do that. Pull cards for yourself to check on your general energies for the next 2 weeks. And 2 weeks from now, check it out. See if you were right. See what happened. And then whether you were or not, you know, we'll keep working on it. But let me know in the comments how it went. I really look forward to hearing everything of your tarot journey. And I guess that's it for today. I will do part 1 at a different time. Please let me know your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. I do primarily pick a card readings, but I'm going to continue the how-to lessons, all right? So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Best of luck on your tarot journeys, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.